Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the Cyber Vigilance Podcast today. So this is an exciting one because it's our first ever podcast episode. And today I'm joined by Toby.
Hi guys, thanks for joining. Thanks for listening to our inaugural cyber podcast and our whittlings on about various things and our observations of what we see of the cybersecurity industry today. I'm CRO here, Cyber Vigilance. I work very closely with Katie and our customers to help them navigate through the often murky world of technology and cyberspace to get desired business outcomes and keep them cyber secure.
Great. Thanks, Toby. And yes, so you're also joined by me. I'm your host, Katie, also from Cyber Vigilance. So today's topic is an exciting one because it's something that we speak about quite a lot internally, along with our customers as well. And it's quite a key driver for them when they're making decisions on their cybersecurity strategy. So we're going to be talking about cyber insurance and taking you on that journey of where it's come from and where it's heading and sort of the things that you can do to make sure that you're reducing your risk and also reducing your premiums. Just some things that we've observed from speaking with our customers, as well as working with vendors and just our general knowledge of the industry so far. So just to kind of start off, we're obviously not cyber insurance experts, but this is just our opinions and things that we've seen so far. So I guess to kick off, it'll be great to kind of look at where cyber insurance has started and kind of where organizations sort of perceived cyber insurance to help them. So I guess the biggest point is that cyber insurance correlates with the rise of attacks. So when you're looking back, perhaps cyber insurance wasn't as defined as it should be, purely because there wasn't as much knowledge on the industry and sort of where attacks were going. So traditionally, you might say that cyber insurance was a bolt-on for general company insurance. You kind of filled in a quick report on what your strategy is, what you've already got in place, and away there you go. I don't know if that's something that you've also seen, Toby.
Yeah, definitely. I think a number of years ago it was very much a case of traditional cybersecurity tools would be in place in an organisation, so perimeter firewalling, endpoint protection, or antivirus, probably as it was then. So a number of tools in place, I think, which companies would have observed as good cyber hygiene back then. Of course, the landscape and how organisations are now very disparate. People working from home, outside the perimeter and the corporate firewall and so on. It's made the surface attack area much more complicated, and therefore many more tools to try and combat that. But of course, from a cyber insurance point of view, 5 or 6 years ago, when you were looking to fill in a proposal to go and get some cyber insurance, you might have had a number of reasons for wanting cyber insurance. It may well be that perhaps in your supplier or customer you were dealing with might say, okay, well, are you covered for a cyber attack? Does that cover your third parties as well in the event of a breach if you lose our data or our IP or whatever that might be? So again, proliferation in number of attacks and also other factors driving those. So I think the application forms for requesting cyber insurance used to be a bit sort of finger in the air, trying to understand what you've got, what you haven't got. But I think the more that people have gone and bought cyber insurance to cover themselves, I think the more payouts that have happened, because there's a lot of ambiguity around why or how a breach may have happened. And of course, there's a couple of things there. They've had to kind of look at this in more detail to ensure that what they're paying out on is as a result of something that somebody said, perhaps we've got cover for this, or we've got a tool for, let's say, perimeter firewalling. But actually, it turns out they didn't have them switched on, or they weren't patched, or they weren't the latest and greatest, or they hadn't got a subscription, or whatever it might be. Insurance companies have now had to come up to speed with how they underwrite these risks better, because I think actually the risks they were taking on were bad risks, because actually people couldn't ordinarily convey what their cyber hygiene looked like and what their risk surface attack would look like. That's moved on. It's got more complicated, and I'm sure you're probably going to go into it. I think you've got some statistics around what that insurance space now looks like. So
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose it's all about knowing what you're insuring, like you said, like people often not knowing exactly how many devices they had or their IoT devices or all these other things that now organizations are being breached through that perhaps 10 years ago wasn't a way for hackers to get in. It's sort of, there's such a broad spectrum of ways that attacks are being carried out now, and it's sort of balancing that and figuring out what you're actually insuring. So looking at what organizations kind of perceived insurance as, for a lot of organizations, it was sort of thinking of that backup plan. So say they get a ransomware attack, are their insurance going to pay out for that ransom demand? And a lot of hackers actually targeted organizations that they thought that they had insurance purely because they knew it was almost like an easy win. They were going to get the payout. They're getting what they want out of the attack, essentially. And the organization then gets the keys back to the kingdom. They get the decryptors, hopefully. All that kind of stuff. Well, yeah, hopefully. In some cases, I suppose that wasn't always the case. So a lot of organizations kind of perceive insurance weighing up the cost of their premiums versus the cost of an actual cybersecurity strategy that was going to prevent attacks. So kind of weighing up the cost versus the risk to their business. Nowadays, a lot of organizations don't realize that ransomware payouts aren't even included in cyber insurance for a lot of insurance providers.
And I think that was I think early days, and you hit the nail on the head. I think it was actually by cyber insurance. If we have a breach and we go to them and we make a claim on that policy, was that payout was designed to pay a ransomware fee. Actually, that's not really what it's designed for. Actually, it's really designed for getting your business back on its feet post breach. So in most respects, I think the default is don't pay a ransomware fee, because first and foremost, you don't know whether you're going to get the keys to the kingdom back. Are you going to get your data back? Are they going to, at the end of the day, they've just breached your business and told you that you've got to pay up a ransom. How can you trust them? You can't. So I think that the default position by anybody in the analyst world is don't pay. So really, then you come back to the premium payout or the fee payout, and you go, well, it's not there to pay a ransomware fee. It's actually there to rebuild your organization, pay for incident response, security analysts, retrieval of data, getting your company back up on its feet, and potentially PR. If you're a known brand or organization, the PR fallout from that, I could probably think of 10 off the top of my head, which, if I go back over the last couple of years, have had a breach through one of various ways, who the PR fallout was the demise. It wasn't actually the ransomware attack, and it certainly wasn't any ransomware fee paid out. And indeed, some have actually paid out a ransomware amount of money, and then still had the PR issue to deal with. But unfortunately, the money then wasn't there to recover through the kind of the PR stuff and fix everything. And so you're back to square one. So it's very much it's very much a case of cost versus risk, and I guess depends who in the organisation is kind of driving this particular objective. Is it a demand from kind of board level on we need cyber insurance? It's often better to ask, well, why do you need that? There's usually a driving factor. And then depending on kind of how you then go and say, well, how do you get a better premium, for example? Are you even insurable? Because I think the point is now that 5 or 6 years ago, pretty much most insurers would go, oh yeah, we'll take on a cyber risk insurance. You go and give them some detail about your organization. They'd go and take it to the underwriters who'd say, what's the risk look like? Is it acceptable? Finger in the air. And I know I'm really sort of playing this down and generalizing it. I'm sure there's much more to it than that. But ultimately, you don't know what you don't know. So actually, if I go to an insurer and I say, I think I've got all of this stuff and we're protected, you go to an insurer and you say, give me a policy based on that, how much it's going to cost. The reality is, if you then go and have a breach and actually you've misunderstood being covered in some way, shape or form, or there's a particular gaping hole in your armor in terms of cybersecurity, then actually, there's far more chance that you're lower hanging fruit and you're more accessible a more accessible target to bad actors. So it's a very interesting one. There's a lot of different factors to it, but ultimately, I think the point of the payout isn't to pay ransomware; it's actually to pay for everything else. So rebuild your business, PR, and so on.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing that I've, as I was researching for this podcast, I found a graph that shows the percentage of claims made and what those reasons were. And I thought it was quite interesting to run through because it kind of correlates with what we were just talking about. So this report is based on last year, so 2022, and the top cause of claims made was ransomware, so 29% of that. Which obviously just relates exactly to what we were just talking about, how a lot of people were worried about being hit by ransomware. It's almost like worst case scenario. And yeah, it just reflects in those figures there. The second one being just other unknowns. So there's a whole host of things that could be at 17% there. And what I thought potentially was most interesting was that 15% of those claims made were through business email compromise, which is something that we see a lot when we're speaking to customers about.
I was going to say maybe those unknown ones are because people don't know what they got hit by in the first place. So perhaps they are genuinely unknown. We don't know how somebody got in. Perhaps if they did that beforehand, that wouldn't be a statistic, or maybe at least the unknowns would be somewhere further down the list.
Yeah, true. But yeah, as I was saying, like the business email compromise part of things, big one at the moment. We see a lot of customers coming to us with this being an issue. Email still one of the top attack vectors, so no surprise that one comes in third. Looking further down the list as well, you've got staff mistakes at 4%. So obviously that could be a whole host of different things, whether that's through...
We've all been there. We've all clicked on something.
Yeah.
Not now, obviously, of course.
Oh yeah, not now. It's difficult. I feel like it's something that a lot of staff are worried about and conscious about, but actually don't always know how to respond to those kind of things. And immediately just panic. Should I click on it? Should I not click on it? There's a lot of fear there for employees, I would say.
There is, but I guess the fear element kind of keeps it front of mind. And I think that's the point with a lot of the way that business kind of operate with their staff these days is actually keeping cybersecurity is hot topic in pretty much every organization. So actually keeping it front of mind with users, employees, in any capacity really, anywhere that you've got access to the outside world or communication with people that might ask you for things. So much of this boils down to cyber awareness training and various other things, but also having the tools at the back end to protect people. Because at the end of the day, humans will always make mistakes. I think one of the other things is that the sort of proliferation of GPT and other tools will enable people whose mother tongue perhaps isn't English to craft together emails which once were, I'm uncle whatever from wherever, put this money into my bank account and I'll deposit your inheritance into your account. Yeah, those days are gone. I mean, we always joke about those, but the reality is those kind of emails will now progress. ChatGPT will allow people whose mother tongue isn't English to craft together a very well orchestrated email, great punctuation, good use of English language, which might come across, and also the ability to actually kind of put some emotion into that to the person that they're actually communicating with. So, knowing when someone's likely to be busy, somebody in accounts end of month rushing to make payments to get everything done end of month. If you're in a sales organization, it's people pushing for orders to be placed and invoices to be done and money to be transferred, is getting people in that kind of emotional time when perhaps they're not going to pay as much attention to something that lands in their inbox, which is urgent, or might have been, it might be an impersonation from the CEO. Can you get me 25 Amazon vouchers, I want to do a sales thing at the end of the month, and they go and do that. I personally know people that have had that happen too, and they're people that, I know they're intelligent people, but in the heat of the moment, when they've been busy, they've been pressured to do something, there's a lot of emotion in there, and people just kind of go, all right, yeah, it's from the CEO, let's just go get that done. And that's where these attacks are most common, I think. But that, I think, will change the game in terms of the way that the kind of human interaction with the outside world and how you're exploited.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you're already starting to see how there's vendors in the industry are targeting that AI piece. So ChatGPT being able to detect whether, for example, an email has been AI generated. That's definitely been something that influences cyber insurance moving forward. Because I suppose when you look at sort of the last 5 years, obviously we've had COVID, and a big element of that was the increase in ransomware attacks, and that was kind of like the hot topic. And I feel like it's slowly moving towards AI and ChatGPT and those kind of things, which are being utilized. And they're definitely going to make a difference. And you'll probably start to see a lot more vendors pushing protection for being able to detect those kind of attacks as well.
I think another point on ChatGPT as well is if you look at those tools are external of organisations. So where you look at perhaps employees that go, oh, can I use that to quickly do what might have taken me 4 hours to write a document? Can I now just go and run it through ChatGPT and have it done in 25 seconds? Is taking your data, so it's actually taking your organisational data and stuff that shouldn't be privy to the outside world or sensitive, and actually running that into one of these tools, which then it's stored, it goes somewhere. That's how the thing learns, right? So companies are having to kind of readjust to that. I guess it's the next kind of step on from how do you keep your data safe and how do you prevent people from sharing things they shouldn't be sharing. Again, potential for another breach in terms of IP, but also people just kind of relying then on outside tools to do that. So I think a lot of companies will look to bring in-house their own kind of version of ChatGPT and AI generation tools to give people kind of what they want. Clearly, we know it works, but actually is bringing it in-house to lessen that threat.
Yeah, and I suppose that would also kind of fit under that staff mistakes element we were just talking about. Like, would inputting sensitive data from your company into a chat GPT fall under staff mistakes? Would it be covered by cyber insurance? It's sort of still an unknown element so far, but yeah, definitely picking up the pace in terms of what you're seeing online, in terms of organizations being hit with attacks carried out by AI generated emails or through the loss of IP, through an employee engaging in a chat GPT, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's interesting to see these statistics and kind of figure out, it kind of fits in with what we were talking about before, and it kind of also fits in with the requirements for cyber insurance, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, that interesting to look at, and sort of the rise of cyber insurance over the last few years. Like I was talking there about post-COVID world where ransomware is on the rise of ransom payments or cost of a data breach has drastically increased. Obviously, you're going to want to insure that because the cost of your business is massive now. So just looking at some statistics, the global uptake of cyber insurance in 2020 was at 47% compared to a 26% in 2016. So,
and I think a lot of that comes back down to, again, when we were talking about sort of the cost versus risk. I've no doubt that in some organisations it's like it will never happen to us, or we'll take that chance. As to whether to invest in plugging various gaps in your armory. Same thing with insurance. It's like, do we need it? Is this quite an expense to have? And of course, insurance it's not a savings fund or anything. If you don't use it, get to the end of that year, you've lost that premium, that's it, and you haven't been breached. There's people going, well, it's a lot of money just to throw at something you get nothing back for. However, obviously the situation, I think, has changed somewhat as tools have got better and people now have more visibility into who is hitting them, how they're hitting them, how they're targeting them. Actually, I think most organisations now can see that it's not a case of if, but when, and that most people now recognise that even if you're a small organisation, you could be a small organisation of like 5 people supplying into a global organisation of 100,000 people. If you're the weakest link in that supply chain, as an example, and you hold a lot of data on that organisation, you're the weakest link now into there. And so I think people are now recognising that it is relevant to everybody. As I said earlier, I think some suppliers will now require cyber insurance of their through their supply chain, and likewise perhaps even customers as well.
Yeah, definitely. And are you looking at sort of the cost of cyber insurance as well in comparison to that? In the first quarter of 2022, cyber insurance prices rose by 110%. And I guess that's a byproduct of what we've seen of the last few years, and knowing that it impacts everyone, even those smaller businesses, and the cost of that in terms of the breach, ransomware payout, all these kind of things, it just massively influenced that. And then also going on to look at a study that showed that by 2025, the global cyber insurance market will be 20 billion in terms of premiums, which is massive.
Staggering amount.
Yeah. So yeah, I suppose just looking at as well what things are influencing cyber insurance in terms of what it doesn't cover anymore. I know before we were talking about those ransom payments and does your insurance cover those? Probably not, because paying the ransom is also funding cybercrime, which is obviously not encouraged by a lot of law enforcement across the globe. Also looking into that supply chain attack piece as well. I just have to look at the SolarWinds hack a few years ago, and then the Move It breach that's been happening recently. That's now a really important element that businesses have to take into consideration, and in some elements it's almost out of their control. So vetting your suppliers is probably going to be quite a key thing for cyber insurance moving forwards.
I think another thing to bear in mind is that insurance companies will rather have 100 good risks, so people that understand their cybersecurity posture are insuring or buying cyber insurance for the right reasons, rather than considering it as a ransomware payout. So they'd rather have 100 £10,000 premiums for good cyber posture, good cyber hygiene organisations that are getting insured, rather than, let's say, for example, 10 bad cyber hygiene customers who don't really understand kind of how their organisation operates. And some of these are very, very complicated, so it's very difficult to unpick that. But they'd rather have the good risks, lots of good risks, than fewer bad risks, but big premiums. Because obviously you look at that and go, there's a number of reasons. First and foremost, if you take a good risk, it means that somebody's probably got Cyber Essentials Plus as a basic, cyber awareness training, lots of tools. They understand their posture, they understand the gaps, but they've got a process or a framework in place to address those things. They've got a ransomware plan as an example. The difference is there that they're getting insured still for probably a good reason, rather than just looking at it as a way just to pay out a ransomware and be, dare I say it, lazy. Just sticking plaster over it is put some insurance on it, that covers the payout, and we'll worry about the cybersecurity bit later, which of course you move on to your day job and you don't get round to it. So smaller premiums, or indeed now, no premiums, uninsurable risk. If you don't know what you don't know, if you don't know what your cyber hygiene is like, well, actually, you're a bad risk. We're not even going to insure you. So I think it all the way through, it kind of breeds a better kind of policy, organizational behavior, procedure, process, making sure the people have the right tools in place, making sure there's education in there.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of leads on to what things are needed now to be insurable. You can research online. There's sort of a list of maybe 8 to 10 things that you can have in place that will justify and fit the requirements that a lot of providers require for you to be insurable. So I've made a list here of some of the key ones that I've seen. So top one being an EDR/XDR product in place. Obviously, that provides a protection for your endpoints. Email security. This was one that I know we spoke about before, maybe a year ago, wasn't actually even on this list, which was quite surprising because it's one of the main attack vectors. And also just looking at that other list we read through, business email compromise being one of those top % of claims made. Email security definitely should be on that list. Multi-factor authentication, backups, privileged access management, asset management. So again, that's one we referenced earlier. knowing what you're meant to be protecting, knowing exactly what you have is key there. Patch and vulnerability management and network monitoring. So those are the key ones that I've seen floating around in terms of what is definitely needed in order to be insurable. And a lot of insurers won't insure you unless you have those. So I suppose I kind of want to go into anything that we would add onto that list. Of course, that list is a great foundation for building out a strategy and making sure that you are insurable. But there's a few things that I would say personally are missing from that list. I don't know if you'd agree. What's missing? I would add training, employee training onto that list. Mentioned earlier, staff mistakes and phishing is another one of the top attack vectors. So having that in place, ensuring that everyone in your business has access to resource and reporting, so that if they do feel like something doesn't look like what it should, they know what the correct procedure for that is. And I know we always talk about how security awareness training is something that a lot of people would yawn at, but it's moving in a different direction now, where it's more around the cultural and behavioural change instead of just enforcing training once or twice a year.
Yeah, I agree. I think something that we speak to a lot of customers about is that that kind of, well, there's a couple of things in there. Back into that list. I think even if you start at the top where you're looking at EDR and XDR, so if you think that the what came before that was antivirus. Well, antivirus is kind of great about being able to sanity check about known exploits in the wild. But what it didn't do is it didn't really cater for anything kind of with a greater level of complexity. And what it wasn't really able to do was properly respond or to detect and respond to these things. So I guess where we've moved on from traditional antivirus to be able to detect and respond, and now we move into the kind of the wonderful world of XDR, which is always an interesting topic with people. Anyway, I think
that's a whole nother episode.
That's another podcast in itself. Again, it's interesting because it gives you insight into kind of where organizations are going, or where vendors or technology companies are going, and how they're kind of addressing the handshake. Email security, again, you mentioned traditionally, and a lot of people are still using traditional email security. Again, it's kind of good to a point, but again, it's working mostly on kind of what it knows is bad, but what it doesn't know is the stuff that it doesn't know, like we don't know. So actually, we're now looking at technology and tools that are using AI and machine learning. Again, something else that's now sort of bandied around as being a sort of the kind of the latest trend, but it's actually understanding that how does that work, and it's looking at behavioral analysis of organizational users' inboxes. How do you communicate with people? How good's your use of the kind of the written word, punctuation, grammar, who you talk to, how often you talk to them, where they are. Is actually, there's extra layers now which maybe take the email security piece from sort of 85% useful at getting rid of most dross out of your inbox to actually looking at the credible threats, the ones that are genuine threats, are the ones we miss because they're usually worded quite well, or they're fairly sophisticated in their approach. So email security now has come a long way, so I'm not surprised that one's in there. It's taken a while for it to make the list. Multi-factor authentication, again, just an obvious one, but I think again vendors have done very well now to enable multi-factor authentication in their applications, and I think most people now are probably commonly used to having an authenticator app and actually using that. So again, another obvious one, but good that it's in there. Backups, again, it sort of sits on the party line of does it fall into cybersecurity? Does it fall into sort of data center? Because obviously that's data and all that stuff, but absolutely backups is a cybersecurity problem. If you don't have backups, somebody does get in. If you don't have a separated backup with which to fall back on to rebuild whatever it is you have in terms of data, you're kind of stuffed. So again, important. Again, privileged access management. It's no good giving somebody 30 people in IT the same password and username for every single tool platform that you use. One disgruntled employee could bring that down in seconds. Again, asset management, knowing what you've got, visibility. How many devices have you got? Where are they? Because again, if you think you've got 1,000 desktops and you put antivirus or EDR, XDR on 1,000 desktops, but actually you've got 1,050. Well, now you've got an unprotected amount of 50, and that's your lowest hanging fruit. That's the route in. So an absolute must. Vulnerability management, again, is being able to then say, okay, we know what those assets are, we know what the devices are, and we know that's not patched, we know that's got a vulnerable version of OS on it, or whatever. Again, a big task for anybody who looks after this stuff to be able to get around all of those and say, well, where am I not patched? Again, low-hanging fruit, so incredibly important. Monitoring, the eyes all the time, is being able to see what's going on your network. Is there anything unusual? So again, for those to come through. But I think we'll see more things coming into that list as we go forward. I think security awareness training will be one, and I think you're absolutely right. I think traditional stuff is a platform, give a user access to it, go and tell them to do the content, click the 10 question quiz at the end, which, let's be honest, they're usually not that tricky. And usually then you're probably not required to go and recertify for a period of time, which of course then is not front of mind. So again, seeing tools now that are actually interacting with what you're doing as a person during the day is going to be key. I think that's definitely going to be on the roadmap for people.
Yeah, I think as well, something that I just thought of that haven't really seen much on those lists is around cloud security. And obviously there's a big push for that now, and I haven't seemed to come across that on any of the lists. So I imagine any kind of cloud workload security is going to become quite key for cyber insurance moving forward as well.
Yep, I think so. And funny, isn't it? Because actually, cloud services are not exactly a new thing. There's something, although, not all organizations have moved to the cloud, and indeed some have moved to the cloud and moved back for cost reasons, for management reasons, for security reasons. So yeah, you're right. I think we'll see more.
Yeah. And I guess just to sum this up, all of those things, it's all about providing you visibility, right? We always talk about how you can't protect anything unless you know it's there. So visibility, always key. So I guess any final remarks on this topic? I guess a lot of these things are just good practice for cyber security as a strategy in its whole, but depending on cyber insurance for your strategy is perhaps not the best way forward. They should be collaborative. It shouldn't be one or the other.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I think
so.
Yeah. I think that's it for today. I think we covered quite a lot there. A lot of interesting things that obviously we've experienced from speaking to customers, vendors, just from what we've seen in the industry. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. And I'm sure we'll see you all in our next episode.
Thanks all.